Oh, it's terrible. The milk is blinked. What does that mean? It means it's bad. In Appalachia, when milk goes bad, you say it's blinked. We say it's blinked. Sometimes people say blinky, but I grew up with Pap and Granny calling it blinked. When the milk was bad, we knew it had blinked. Yesterday I bought milk and it's already blinked. That's a good example of a sentence that I might use. Some examples from the Dictionary of Smoky Mountain English are, in 1956, the Hall Collection, Del Rio, Tennessee, you can't drink it, it's blinked. 1961, Seaman, Arms of Mountain, we are a long way from a cow. Besides, without eyes, the local milk turns blinky almost at once. 1995, Weber, Rugged Hills, when we first moved here, Ruby Noah introduced us to an expression that took us a while to figure out. Eventually, however, I realized that when she said blinked milk, she meant milk that had gone a little sour. My father truly enjoyed blinked milk, Ruby Noah told me. He'd put it on a big piece of cornbread for supper.
When I was a little girl, I used to go with Granny down to the big garden and we grabbled for potatoes, which means gently pulling back the leaves of the plant and just barely digging a little bit into the dirt and getting enough to harvest for that night's supper, but not harvesting them all. And we would cook us up a mess and they was good.
In Appalachia, you'll often hear people talk about a mess, but they're not talking about a mess that someone just spilled the milk or made a mess with a bunch of papers. They're talking about a mess of food, so it's in relation to food. So what is a mess? Well, a mess is a portion of food big enough for you to eat, so for your family to eat. So often you might hear people say, I picked a mess of beans today and I'm going to cook them for supper. Or maybe Matt went fishing yesterday and brought me a mess of fish and we're going to eat them today. Well, when you start talking about a mess of this or a mess of that, people often want to know, well, what is a mess? Does that mean that's 1 gallon? That's 2 cups? What is it? Well, a mess is actually dependent on the size of your family. So for me, a mess of beans is enough for 4 people to eat. If I was in a family of 8 people, a mess of beans would be enough for 8 people to eat. So as you can see, it's kind of vague, but whoever's doing the talking, when they're talking about a mess of beans, a mess of fish, a mess of whatever it is, they're actually talking about enough to feed their family. Now, the Dictionary of Smoky Mountain English says a mess is a noun, is a collection or portion, especially of meat. I would disagree with that today. I'm sure when the dictionary was written, maybe that was right. But for today, it's mostly a mess is talked about in terms of vegetables most of the time, or fish. That's really common too. But still, so it could be meat. But in 1913, Capehart, our Southern Highlanders, says, I allowed I done growed a bit after that mess of meat. So after eating their mess of meat, they allowed that they had already growed a bit. Powerful mess, huh? 1937 Hall Collection, Cosby, Tennessee. The bear killed lots of stock. He wouldn't eat but 2 messes out of a big one and then kill him another one. So they were talking about messes, not just in people, but the bear. They were thinking about enough food. So the bear would eat a mess of the calf, or out of the stock, out of the calf, and then he'd come back later and eat him another mess. Hawk's Done. I started that day, I sent her up yonder to Arrowwood's branch to pick a mess of wild salad. So whoever that was had sent someone to pick a mess of salad, mess of wild greens. So that mess would have been big enough for them to make a meal out of.
In Appalachia, sometimes a bait is used to describe a large amount of food, and tonight we're going to have a big bait of deer meat and it's going to be good.
In Appalachia, we have sweet potatoes and we have Arsh potatoes. Now, you know what a sweet potato is, so what's an Arsh potato? An Arsh potato is just a regular white potato, a regular Irish potato. But over the years, that Irish part has become corrupted to the point that we call them Arsh potatoes or Arsh taters. So when I was growing up, Pap and Granny might say, do you want a sweet tater for supper or do you want an Arsh tater for supper? That's how we distinguished between the two. The Dictionary of Smoky Mountain English has an entry, of course, for Arsh potato. So they say an Irish potato is a noun, but a variant form is Arsh tater or Arsh potato. the common white potato with Irish added to distinguish it from a sweet potato, or Arsh added as we're saying it. 1939, the Hall Collection, Roaring Fork, Tennessee. This was a good country for Arsh potatoes. They'd take the potatoes to Knoxville, 200 bushels from 1 acre. That was E.L. Reagan. That's a lot of potatoes. 1942, the Hall Phonetics, they documented that Arsh meant the common white potato. And then in 1991, I'll go ahead and tell you, I don't like this entry. It upsets me. Haynes Haywood Home, 77. Jutt would say Arsh taters, and then in parentheses it has Irish potatoes, and other idioms common to uneducated mountain people. Well, that's the part I would beg to differ from. I consider myself educated. I consider Granny and Pap educated. I consider my brothers, Steve and Paul, educated, and my husband. And we all say Arsh tater. So just because we say that, I don't think it all means that we're uneducated. So in Appalachia, an Arsh tater is a common white potato.
Sometimes in Appalachia, instead of saying carbonated drink, someone will say a dope. You want to go get a dope, you know. And this is a dope bottle that we found up the creek. It's an old one, probably from the 40s. And then this is what the dope that I would drink today looks like. This is a 0 sugar black cherry. It's a carbonated drink from Virgil's. It's actually pretty good.
In Appalachia, you'll sometimes hear the term saucered and blowed. It's really an old term that comes from days gone by. You don't really hear it as much today, but you still will hear it, and you'll hear people talking about it with fond memories. So what that means is, when people would drink their coffee, because it was so hot, they would pour a little bit of it out in their saucer, and that larger space would allow it to cool faster, and then they would drink some of their first coffee, actually drink it from the saucer. So in those days, everyone used a wood stove, and their coffee got so hot, hotter than typically ours does today. I'm sure some people's maybe is still that hot. But in days gone by, when everyone did, it was kind of like you had your coffee boiling by the time that you would drink it. One of my readers, Garland Davis, he told me that his granny's coffee was so hot it would catch on fire if it hadn't been wet. So then you can begin to see why people would saucer and blow their coffee. My Aunt Pearl, I can remember her doing it at Granny Gazzy's house, that she would pour some out like that and drink it. And I've also seen Granny do that, saucer and blow her coffee. Over the time, that term, saucered and blowed, if something was saucered and blowed, it kind of began to represent done or completed. So you might hear somebody, if they were talking about a project or something they were building or something, they would say it's saucered and blowed. It would just mean it was completed, it was finished. The milk's blinked.
I can't work under pressure. Okay, you ready? Mm-hmm.